Well, welcome to the 8th Lunch Club podcast. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce the founder and creative director of Ragdoll Productions, which for over 30 years has made over 1,700 programmes delighting children across the globe. Anne Wood, what a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, and very nice to be here, Olly.
Would you know, I've just discovered something we have in common, which I didn't realise. I was just reading up on you, and we were both came from County Durham. I was living in Whitnley Weir, just 20 minutes away from where you used to live in Spennymoor.
That's correct, absolutely. Well, we can speak Geordie then, that'll be nice.
Do you know, I used to have, until I was about 3, a really splendid Geordie accent, and then unfortunately my parents moved south, and everything went south.
Traitor.
I know.
The problem is, if you don't stay there, however, much you've achieved or whatever, they don't love you anymore up there. You've left the purlieu of the northeast. So
I'm sure if we went back, they'd buy us a pint, Anne.
Well, they might. Depends. A few would. Yeah. As one lady famously said to me, "Well, I don't care, Anne. I don't care what they say. I'm very pleased you've done so well."
Oh well, you have. This is the thing. I mean, I let's kick off with. I mean, the amount of young minds that you must have inspired over the years is staggering. Because, from shows in the Night Garden, I adore Twirlywoos, Teletubbies. The list is so endless, and the awards are super impressive. But it seems to me they're linked by a common thread of. And I want to ask you if this links back to your original work as a secondary school teacher. There is a really wonderfully charming and warm, calm sense of learning and discovery in all of them that I find completely entrancing.
That's very nice of you to say. I'd like to think that's true. I am an old lady now and a grandmama. And the thing that concerns me, and I don't want to sound like, well, it's just because, I'm seeing it from this great distance. And of course, there's been a technological revolution in my lifetime, enormously. So even just in the last 10 years, it's unimaginable to think that when we did Teletubbies, nobody really were on mobile phones, not, unless they had ones the size of bricks. But now every child has one. So the world has changed, and I fully accept that. But there's an awful lot of work done and shown in the name of children that is aimed at them. There isn't the same sense of enfolding them. And I think, that when we're making anything, you want to reach out to your audience and as it were, enfold them. I think that's particularly true for very young children, which, of course, most of our work is for very young children. As they get older, of course, then it's not cool to be enfolded. But when you're little, you need that. And I think that's the thing that we aim for. Whether we always achieve it or not, I don't know. But the whole thing is in the timing and as it were, speaking to the child's perception, which is different from an adult perception.
I think
it's trying to understand that difference, which is the key to writing it.
Yeah, it's that unique perspective, as you say, that children have, wide-eyed and admiring of the world, that I think it seems to me is a real opportunity to take them a little bit deeper. Right? And it's all too easy these days, I think, to make a big splash on the surface, lots of noise, lots of colour, lots of movement. But it's quite a different thing to actually take the mind and let it really settle and evolve and develop through the work that you do. And I remember the first time I saw In the Night Garden, and the role of music's obviously very important, but it's just a grown-up. I was watching it with my own kids. I felt totally transported into another place. And apart from saying thank you so much for helping me get my kids to sleep, I just, I think the charm of it, you think of the absolute unique voice of all the characters. Obviously, having Derek Jacobi was amazing. But it seems to me these works take time and understanding. And I'm wondering if you're finding, as the years go by, if broadcasters appreciate that and how hard it is becoming to make that a priority for shows.
Well, they do take time, as you say, but they also take enormous amounts of money. Night Garden cost 14 million.
Wow.
To do, and nobody's going to pay that. As far as I am aware, I don't think there'll ever be another one. That's not to say that there isn't anybody capable of making another one. There are people out there, I'm sure, who are just equally gifted. But who is going to pay for it?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether you noticed the article by Polly Toynbee quite recently. And Polly was one of the few people who actually understood Teletubbies when it first happened.
Yeah.
You know, she gave us a very good review, which was a relief because we were being hammered in the press everywhere else.
Yeah.
But she wrote very recently that in all areas of children's work, you know, not necessarily just children's television, but all areas, everyone says yes and does nothing.
Yeah.
And and so a lot of the services for children are just being eroded and eroded and eroded, or reorganized. And I mean, I can see British children's television content disappearing because it's virtually impossible now to make it work financially.
Well, this brings me quite neatly to a question from one of our Lunch Club members, Damien Fox, who asks, is it fair to say that the potential for merchandising and at least 52 episodes are a required part of the modern day pitch? And if so, do you feel this is a help or a hindrance to the industry in general?
Yes, I mean, the answer is yes to both those questions, and I do think it's a hindrance. Because it's actually shifting the focus away from the unfolding nature of what you're trying to do. You know, when I first started, and you know, I had some big hits like Rosie and Jim. There wasn't a Rosie and Jim doll.
Yeah.
And then I actually personally involved people in the Philippines, a women's cooperative in the Philippines, to make some because we were constantly being asked for them. And that raised a great deal of money for them. And then the head of Oxfam changed, or the head of this department changed. They came in and said the only people making any money out of this are the people in the Philippines, which I thought was the whole point.
Yeah, that's good.
But then they stopped it.
Really?
And yes, and by then, of course, other people were starting to take an interest because of the video market. Now, until the video market happened, you know, this is what changed my attitude actually to the force. Up until I made the first series of Rosie and Jim, and in fact, I made all of it for ATV Central Television now. And the video market happened, and Central Television made £1 a video, and it sold well over 1 million.
Wow.
So you can work out the sum. We didn't get a halfpenny of that.
That's
and I thought, oh no, that's not. So I put myself on a course to learn a bit more about how to handle this kind of situation. And you know, that's when the iron enters your soul over things like this, because you knew that in order to make work, you had to find more finance. I mean, if I hadn't had that attitude, by the time we got the opportunity to make Teletubbies, I mean, I made Teletubbies based on the fact that I had miraculously sold the American rights. And I borrowed £1 million against them, which I didn't have. I mean, we'd have gone bankrupt. It was a huge risk because we had to dig a great hole in the middle of Warwickshire to make Teletubbyland and shoot it in the way that we did with characters in suits. You know, I mean, Tinky Winky was like Pickford's van coming along. It was so big. And so, you know, you do, but you could take those risks then.
So what was
because by then you'd sort of were more aware of the publishing support you might get and that kind of thing, and of course the video market or the DVD market. I can't remember when the change happened. Now that market no longer exists.
Yeah.
Because of the way in which everything can be downloaded and regurgitated on all our modern systems. So I was gambling on that market in order to raise the finance to do Teletubbies as we wanted to do it. Now you couldn't. You cannot. There isn't, you know, and it's become less possible to take creative risks. And it's a great sadness.
It is, because, I mean, it shows extraordinary character to be, and also belief in the idea to take out a loan of 1 million. But as you say, these days, I don't know if it would happen.
But it wouldn't.
Yeah, I kind of. What do you think? What was the thing about the Teletubbies before anyone else knew? Because obviously it's become iconic. What was it about the idea that made you think, yeah, I'm gonna go all in on the gamble?
I was working with Andrew Davenport, who's an extremely good writer for children. I mean, he has power of recall of what it's like to be a small child, like no one else I've ever worked with. I mean, sadly, we don't work together anymore, and I'm very sorry about that. But um, then we were a very good team. You know, we had complementary skills, so I was relatively confident it's all very complex, this, because Andy had played Tiny in Tots TV, which was a show that I was still doing at the time we started Teletubbies.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always, since Rosie and Jim days, kept in touch with the audience by gathering children's responses, which is not the same as having a focus group or anything like that, because we don't look for answers. We simply observe how children respond with their whole selves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a response is something you do with all of yourself, you know, instinctively, really. And Andy had become interested in this, and he used to watch the footage with me, and we had a very good rapport about how the youngest children were not necessarily taking any meaning from what we were producing, even though we were reaching down. That's an awful expression, but you know what I mean, in age, not in any other way. And so I was relatively confident that we were, and also I was old enough to retire even then, and everybody else was very young. So even if it had gone pear-shaped, you know, nobody would have suffered.
Yeah.
And so it was a good time. It was time. It was opportunity. It was one of those, you know, serendipitous things, and it just happened. And we'd got no idea that we caused what we caused. I mean, it was outrageous what happened.
It's incredible looking back. And I've got a question here from Lunch Club member Lucy Daniel Raby, who'd like to ask, how do you and your team, or how did you, I should say, approach the task of writing the scripts for Teletubbies and shows like Teletubbies?
It's a mystery still to me to this day. Andy wrote them, I approved them, I edited them, and he is very, very late, always. Like many good creatives, is very, very, very late with them. You know, it was we had notions. He wrote them, I edited them, we agreed, and they were ready the day before we shot them, more or less. Is how it went.
So there wasn't layers and layers of editors and broadcasters.
Oh God, no. I think, I mean, unfortunately, that's what happens now. Everything is micromanaged.
It's committee, isn't it?
Yeah, but it didn't used to be, not then. And of course, if you obliterate the driving mind, the driving imagination that is behind any good creative work, you destroy it. And, you know, I was very, very sad that we were forced to sell our back catalogue in order to survive as a company. And I couldn't get anyone in Britain to keep the Tubbies here. You know, nobody wanted it. Nobody thought it was worth preserving as a British thing. It just went to Canada, and now that company's sold, it'll disappear completely to somewhere or other. I suppose it doesn't matter in many ways because it's all on tape, but it seems a pity that the heritage of children's television isn't recognised in the same way as the heritage of children's books is.
Yeah, and you're right. Britain does have an extraordinary tradition here. And you mentioned books. I love the Book Tower, and I think the
heavens, yes.
Yeah, and you can still you can still see it if you know where to click online. But it's just so. I love the use of live action, the use of animation.
Yes.
It's very gentle, but it really does. The thing that it does is it demands that you use your imagination. It doesn't do it for you. It holds your hand and takes you into the world and then says, okay, now you start to work as well. You start to come with me. And it's just awesome. So that was, I mean, so many people did it. You know, Neil Innes, we had Tom Baker.
Tom was brilliant,
wasn't he? Yeah.
Dear Tom. Oh, I love Tom still to this day. He really, really understood. He was the most, and I used to say, what was it? What did he used to say? Something like, and this is very good, or whatever, you know. And I would say, you can't say that, Tom, because the audience will be going, no, it isn't. And so Tom's answer to that was to lean to camera and go, well, I think it
Oh, yes.
And he could do it. He
Yes.
just was brilliant to camera and with children. And you very seldom, I was extremely lucky to work with him. Because I learned a lot
Yeah.
about the looking into camera thing,
Yeah.
which of course all my characters do,
Yes, it's
because
that
that's part of the unfolding thing.
exactly, and it's a conspiratorial warmth that makes you
Yes,
know that you're part of it. You're in here with me. This is our
yeah,
world. This is our magical realm.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I'm pleased
yeah,
to see more books on TV now. We've got Between the Covers on the BBC on Friday nights at the moment.
yeah.
I think it's time that things like the Book Tower came back, to be honest. I'm just going to throw it out there and hope that happens because I want
Well,
to watch it.
yeah. Magic teapots is plenty around.
Yeah. So I have a question from Dave Worrell, who wants to know, what do you think are the essential elements to make a successful children's TV show?
Oh Lord. If there was a formula, we'd all be doing it, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the genius of the idea is the thing. You can't make it like anything else. You can't go, well, that was successful, let's do one of those. You have to feel it, that there has to be some point of connection with. I mean, this whole thing of finding your way back to being like a child is so misinterpreted. I mean, it's not that you want to be, oh, we all have the child within us and all that sort of sugary stuff. It's not that at all. But those people who are successful in children's work, I think, have the capacity to think their way back to how you felt as a child, what a child's perception would be, and then think, if I was growing in up in today's world, which is so different, how would that affect my perception? Would it affect my perception? Would I still be interested? And in fact, I mean, a lot of it is all about trajectories, and you can clinically dissect, up, down, round and round, all of those concepts that children have to experience before they can even begin to learn to write or read, unless they have that grounding and tactile experience, it's much more difficult for them later. And many children now are not necessarily in an environment that allows them to do that.
Yes.
And so the more that you can bring in that sort of tactile quality, I'm speaking now about young children, obviously, because this is what I've done mostly, or not all I've done, but mostly. Then you need that. So you need the characters, but again, it's the same as for anything. All story comes from character. So then your characters have got to be contextualized in a way that all of those things can come through naturally, and you do it for comic effect, and that's the hardest thing, because writing comedy is the hardest thing, whatever age you're writing for, but it's the most effective. So it's a very complex combination of things, and you're very fortunate if on your team you have a rapport, where you share a sense of humor, and you can't do it by yourself. I strongly believe that our industry is a collaborative one.
It is collegiate, and I was watching an episode of Twirlywoos, and it was showing the repetition of next to get
Oh
across,
God, yes.
which is great. And it's that tactile sense of literally learning what does next do
Yes.
mean. But they're so funny,
Yeah.
and they are so engaging. But the thing that really gets me, you just sort of touched on it just then, actually, is the timing of the comedy, because there's a big
Yes.
difference between tapping it out into a script and then handing it to the team, who then
Yeah.
have to get
Yeah.
the timing of the physical delivery of the moving
Yeah.
characters so
Yeah.
perfect that
Yeah.
it hits, the joke hits, or the timing of
Yeah.
that's what
That's
really
in
gets
the
me.
editing.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I do a lot of that.
Oh, do you? Is that you?
A lot of it is, yes. But it's born of experience, and I mean, people who've I have been known to stand behind a cameraman and hang on to his coattail. Do not take your eye off that, because it seems a long time to you, but it doesn't give me long enough to edit to the right length.
Yeah.
Keep the shot, keep the shot. So that's the other thing. Hold the shot long enough if you're shooting it like that
Yeah.
to, an animation, you're giving me a long tail because um, to an adult perception, I mean, once the children are above 5, 6, it becomes different, of course.
Hmm.
Uh, and of course, little ones will watch, but they're not making their own meaning from it
Mm.
because if you're the capacity to watch and listen and instantly get a meaning comes later. If they're intently watching, if you watch young child, they're intently watching, and then you've got to make it so that the sound and the meaning happens. It's why repetition of stories, when
Mm.
they always want the same story again and again and again. It's again because it's building confidence.
Yeah.
And if they're confident, you see, they'll learn. So this whole thing of creating things that allow children to know more than what's on the screen and to anticipate the gag is
Yeah.
building
Yeah.
their confidence. And so it's all about giving children confidence, really.
And I think also the role of music in that you use very, very well, and the different identities the characters might play off it. And
Yeah.
thinking back to the days gone by of Peter and the Wolf. We
Oh,
know
yeah.
that the picture that can be drawn in a child's mind from sound effects, obviously, but the
Yeah.
music and the charm that comes from that. And also,
Mm.
I wonder what you think about this, but I sort of feel that gives time and space for a more natural way of storytelling, because too often it seems to me at the moment what I see is just really rapid and
Yeah.
scattergun and high energy, and that's it's a one way of doing it. But I love
Mm.
the contemplative feel that a musical cue, for example, would bring.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Mm.
I have a question here from Doris Spriggs, who wants to know: would Anne say that children are the toughest critics?
Well, all I can tell you is I had a very high flying director work on Teletubbies at one stage. And he used to sit there really nervously because he said his work was being viewed by the under 5 committee. He used to be
Yeah.
scared because we used to, we'd shoot stuff and then leave the children watching. And obviously there were adults around, but out of vision, and very often in another room with the door open. And the children could wander off if they were bored or anything. And I mean, I did have one thing that I did, which was a very sort of didactic thing about going to the dentist or something for Tubbies. And all of the children left the room
Ooh.
except one. So we never showed it. But it's not that they're critical, the children. They're not, because children are wonderful. They are prone to love what is put in front of them
Mm.
on the whole. But if it doesn't make any sense to them, if it doesn't hold them, uh, they won't look at it. They just walk away. And I mean, we always made sure that there's other things in the room, toys and books or whatever else they wanted to, or they knew where they were. And we just leave the camera on top of the television and walk away, leave them to it. And they'll just wander off if they're not interested. I mean, it's quite difficult to judge. I mean, we do work often with individual children in their homes
Hmm.
with the permission of parents. That's increasingly difficult to do now because of all the rules and regulations. But fortunately for us, we have quite a number of people who like Ragdoll, and they'll allow us to work with them. But um, and again we have terrible trouble saying to people, look, it's not your child is not being tested. It's us. We,
Mm.
the company who are making the work, are testing ourselves, and this is the only way we can do it. Um, and that's because children watching on their own will not be influenced by the dynamic of the group they're in, and it's easier. But equally, it's sometimes quite interesting to just have 5 or 6 children together.
Yeah.
We never have more than 10, for example, but sometimes because if it's a nursery or something, we have to have 10. But usually they're small groups. But even then, if you have a child on their own, it's lovely when you have children watching on their own and they talk back to the screen.
Oh yes.
That's very telling. I mean, I remember
Yes.
once, many moons ago, probably before half the audience were born, we did a program called Pob on Channel
Oh,
4.
I love Pob.
Yeah,
Now that's showing my age a bit, but I was a
yeah,
big fan. Do carry
yeah.
on. I'm a Pob
Anyway,
fanatic.
in
Yeah.
those days, you didn't get emails; you got letters.
Ah.
And it takes something for somebody to sit down and write a letter to a TV program. We got this wonderful letter from this man who said they'd been really, really cross with their son and sent him away to his room or something, or to another room. And they felt terrible, because you do as parents, don't you? But
You
it's
do, yeah.
necessary sometimes to do it. And then they heard laughter.
Oh.
And they opened the door a crack, and there was this child in front of Pob. For some reason, he'd got Pob on, must have been videotape in those days, and or it was on the telly, I don't know, I suppose. And he was rolling about laughing on the floor, completely forgotten that he'd been told off by his parents. And they felt it was such a thing that they had to write and tell me. And I've never forgotten it. I thought it was a wonderful letter to get.
But they are uplifting those moments.
Yeah.
And I always
Well,
felt...
Pob was completely manic.
Well, the sneezing, the sort of breaking of the fourth wall, the sneezing on the screen, when I
Yes.
loved all that. And,
Well, all that was directly in those days, far long ago. You went on a train, and there were corridor trains.
Yeah.
And I happened to be on a full train, and the child got on, a barely, 8, 9-year-old child, with its parents standing in the corridor. And I happened to be sitting on the end seat next to the window that separated the corridor from the compartment. And this child started to breathe on the window and draw on it, whereupon I did the same back. And we had this conversation that I'd been sitting there actually thinking, I haven't got enough money to do elaborate titles for this program. How can I do this? So, of course, it's supposed to be a child breathing on the screen. Pob is supposed to be breathing on the screen and writing his name. And because the puppeteer happened to make a noise, and I should have picked it up and I didn't, that sounded like spitting, we got terrible publicity about, good publicity because everybody watched it, because he was accused of spitting.
Yeah.
On it, but he wasn't. It was us with furniture polish spraying on a bit of cloth. And this is it. People will always have a go. Little children's programs particularly are open to satire. I mean, that's good fun, really, but and misinterpretation. I mean, the people who write in and tell me that Teletubbies are swearing, in their language.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's a hard one to avoid, I guess, if you don't know.
Well, you get that all the time. You just have to develop a thick skin, because some of it can be quite hurtful, but you don't
I'm sure, yeah.
pay any attention. You get lots of other lovely feedback.
Well, quite right. I mean, these are shows that have remained in my mind throughout my whole life, and we haven't even touched on Roland Rat fans. I mean,
yes, that's a different story altogether.
Era defining. We'll come back to Roland Rat, but Nick Haig would like to know: does Anne think that a children's television producer benefits if he or she has children of their own?
Yes. Well, I had children of my own of the age of Book Tower when I did that, and in general, I think it's a very tricky thing to rely on your own children's responses. Because they love you, they will always respond favourably, or they will want to get your attention. So you have to be a little bit careful about going, well, my children loves this story, for example. A lot of people write to me and say, I've written this story for my little boy, girl, and they love it, and it would make an excellent children's television series. And the answer is no, it wouldn't. Because what you are creating in the direct bond between you and a child at bedtime is the special thing. It's not necessarily the story. I mean, I doubt you could read the telephone directory that used to be to your child at bedtime, but you could read, all sorts of things. And of course, a lovely children's book will do this magical thing of creating a bond between the reader and the listener. And so the better the children's book, the more beautiful the experience. But it is a different experience altogether. It is a completely involving experience. And the trick of making a television program is the passivity. Mm-hmm. You are putting it out there and you are trying to recreate that bond. And to the extent that having children of your own allows you to be aware of their moods, their trends, it's helpful. But again, again, you have to be careful, because I know television is you're broadcasting to one viewer at a time, but there are so many different sorts and kinds of children. And one of the things that I think now, and one of the things I'm currently trying to work on, is there isn't very many children's programs for the younger end of things that deal with emotion.
Yeah.
We're doing a daft cartoon at the moment where one of the characters gets very angry, and we got children doing the voice on it. And this character gets so angry, he lies on the floor and beats the floor with his fists and everything. Now, this you can do in animation. Yeah. But if I had a real life character doing that, it would probably create all sorts of questions from those above. But on the other hand, this is a comic character doing it like this. And all the child is saying is, no, 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 no. And I know from direct experience that will create a chord in many children's lives. And so to that degree, when you've got children in the house of your own and you observe a temper tantrum or, some of these extremes of feeling that your own children will frequently exhibit, that helps. But I think you have to be really careful about that, really careful. I don't think that, to be honest, if you look at the number of children's writers who were really very good and didn't necessarily have children of their own, or if you look at A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh, written for his boy, but nevertheless, it's really about him. And the best, I love Arnold LaBelle. And if you look at Frog and Toad stories, they're actually him and his partner.
Yeah.
Two gay men are living in harmony together. And it is so funny at both levels. It is such brilliance. So I think it's a mixed blessing. I'm giving you a very confused answer because it's a very difficult question. I'm sorry.
It is. But I think the nub of it, and I wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying about emotion. The whole journey of any character being confronted with new circumstances and story unfolding really is emotional resonance, and it depends on what intensity and what nature the emotion is, but that's really the nature of character in story. And you're right though that children, it's the kind of learning to learn thing, isn't it? It's learning to identify the emotions and to know what they are, because you're right, nobody really teaches us that.
But you see, I made a terrible mistake once, twice. Well, I've made a lot of terrible mistakes, but in Tots TV, we wrote a story about Tom and Tilly making a party for Andy. For Tiny, played by Andy. And they wouldn't let him in the house because the party wasn't ready. You stay outside. And he didn't understand, of course, and sat on the swing outside in the garden and sang a sad song. Oh, my goodness, the terrible, terrible letters that came in about children weeping and not being able to go to bed and worried about Tiny and the whole thing. So we didn't, that was foolish. We shouldn't have done that story. But it seemed a quite innocent story to us. And it wasn't. So again, I suppose why people avoid it is that it's a very sensitive thing. You have to be really careful. But it's, Mr. Rogers used to do it brilliantly, in America.
Yes.
He would say to the child, and because it was him, do you get mad? What do you do when you get mad? I play the piano when I get mad. This kind of thing. He was a brilliant, brilliant person. I never met him, I'm sad to say, but if you know anything about how he operated, it was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And he just had that ability to allow children to trust him, and he repaid the trust. And now the whole thing about fame and being on the telly, and everybody likes to be on the telly, and all of that has changed. You couldn't do that sort of telly now, I suspect, because he would be accused of being God knows what. But in the innocent days of the 50s or whenever, I think it was, You could. So we're in a different arena altogether.
I think people listening are going to be absolutely amazed at how many facets there are to the work. I mean, you've got to have so many hats on. Just think of what you just said with the responsibility you have to your audience one by one. You've got the emotional resonance and pitch of the show, but you've got to deliver a show. You've got to be commercially minded. You have to know how to edit. You have to be able to direct, to come up with the concepts, to run a company, to cold call in the USA and all the rest of it. You know what? I've heard legendary tales of you actually really gunning for it and just picking the phone up and being completely indefatigable. Were you always completely determined? Was that part of your character?
I'm from the northeast. You have to be. Yes, is the answer. There's all sorts of stories that grow. I heard somebody talking about me taking over all the editing suites in TVAM, which is true, but nobody else was using them, so I got on. I just purloined them all. But you have to be an opportunist. I mean, you just do. And if you believe in what you're doing, I mean, you don't do it for your own personal gain. You do it because you want to make the program.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have had some terrible experiences in the States cold calling. I did it for years until I actually sold Teletubbies in there, and that was a big triumph. So the persistence actually paid off in the end. And you get many, 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 many rejections. And if you're a female, it's quite funny really, because you get patronised. If you're a female doing children's programs, that's all right. I mean, somebody said to my husband once years ago, oh, yeah, well, my wife, when a couple of years, the children are off to secondary school, she's going to do what your wife does.
Oh, heavens.
And I thought, well, good luck, but it was the assumption was, well, it was a children's program, like anybody could do it.
Yeah.
But Patra, I remember, I walked into Central Television after Rosie and Jim had made this money for them.
Yes.
And I had a meeting, and I just went in, and somebody comes down to take you to the office. It's usually a very nice assistant. And I went in, and there were 3 top executives coming out of the lift. So I did the thing of turning round to see which important person had come in.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd come down to meet me, of course, because of this money that had made. And I didn't sort of realise that. And then once we made money, everyone's attitude changed. And that's dispiriting, really, because while, of course you need money to make the work, the fact that you're only valued because you make money is so American and so not British, I would like to say, but it's everywhere, isn't it now? So that you're only valued according to what your worth is in the marketplace. The sense of values that were working when you had Bill and Ben, Flower Pot Men, and all of that on the telly, that grew out of work with children in preschool or whatever, is no longer valid. It seems to me. That's been my experience anyway.
I think the loveliest thing you said just then was, just make the program. You want to do it because you want to make the program, and
absolutely,
and the rest will follow, surely.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, I know. Thank you for your time. I know we've been keeping you, and it's gorgeous.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm only doing track legs. So it's all right.
Fine. Okay. Well, I was going to just round off actually by asking, what we're recording this amidst the backdrop of the pandemic and various terrible things and lockdown and all the rest. Are you able to reveal anything of what you're currently working on and what the future holds for Ragdoll?
Yes, well, we have currently got 2 big studios in Stratford-upon-Avon, which we no longer need. So those are being sold, and we're just in the process of moving out. And my son, I'm very fortunate in that my son Christopher, who was working in the theatre, went to Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, and then decided he would be very happy to join the family company. He's carrying on in a smaller premises because now the technology is such that we do not need to have all of the space that we used to have. So Ragdoll will continue, albeit in a smaller iteration with less overheads and all the rest of it. I will still in my dotage, still be going, I wouldn't do it like that if I were you, but I'll do a bit, conceptualizing and so on, which would be nice for me because I think I'm very fortunate to be able to still put my nose in, make a bit of mischief now and again in these things. So I think mischief's very important in program making. So I'm working on a new thing with two of the people who trained here, who are artists. It will be animation because we can no longer afford to make live action. And we currently have a new series coming out in the early part of next year with BBC. But again, you see, it's only 55 minutes, 50 times 5 minute shows,
Yeah.
because we can't make the longer shows anymore. We simply cannot raise the money. And it has taken just about all of our own resources to do this because sadly, the contestable fund or the children's content fund awarded us some top-up funding, and the BBC said, no, you can't take it. So we are in the same situation as many, many children's production companies are at the moment, in dire need of recognition and support. But we will just try and continue as best we can. Because we love doing the work, and we would hope that we can hang on there, until perhaps the climate changes. Who knows? Maybe these years of austerity that we're in will do what the earlier years of austerity did, and provide some good creative work. We can but hope, but it's been very, 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 very difficult indeed. And my heart goes out to anybody who's trying to get into this business because it's really difficult. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to end on a gloomy note, because it's worth it in the end. You get deep satisfaction from seeing children laugh at what you do.
I think that's the loveliest sentiment, and here's to making much more mischief in the future. And thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining
My
us.
pleasure. Thank you, Olly. Bye.